There's this very interesting construct that most things in blockchain are frowned upon if they're not open source. And that in some way can kill off innovation, right? Because a lot of innovation comes from the private sector and is funded by the private sector. So you effectively saw tokens back in the day as a way to sort of surpass this, as a way to create wealth around open source projects. But that's also an obscure concept from the player that comes from the traditional environment. So how do you see, how do you see this us transitioning to find a middle point between both of these models?
Yeah, and I firmly stay in both. So into the intellectual property, I'll speak about that in a bit, the traditional intellectual property. But I do see that the movement is very open source. And interestingly, if you look back, probably the biggest open source project ever back in the time, many people don't even know about anymore, and it was a PK-zip, which was a compression technology. If I remember correctly, was started open source. So it was very close to infrastructure and something that business didn't touch. And that's a difference with where we're going. When you start looking at DAOs and smart contracts, they're getting much closer to business. And as you get closer to that customer and you start looking at dApps and how that may interact, I expect that complexity is going to come as a challenge to determine how do we address it. So talk about intellectual property, the space, I see a lot of Creative Commons, obviously according to the open source, but I also started looking at traditional innovation and specifically inventions such as intellectual property. And in my research, I found, because I'm always interested in, I live in the US, what other countries are doing what, and where are, quite often in any technology, there's certain areas that get ahead for whatever reason. It's quite often the people that are there, right? And that's always been true in technology. And this will likely just extend that. So I'm always interested that I don't over represent my US where I live as being a perspective, because it's not, right? This is a global opportunity. Given that, I was looking at actually just on Google, they have patents, global patents. And I was interestingly in research find that the top 5 companies have 67% of the patents for blockchain in 2021 are all Chinese-based firms. And they're who you would think they are. They're Tencent, Alipay. I don't have the other companies right on top of my head, but look at what's happening there. The Chinese government has had some challenges with these firms as well. So it's a very interesting dynamic that while cryptocurrency may be one thing, the blockchain innovation, et cetera, has been going, and that's just from a patent standpoint. The other thing I always like to point out with patents is people quite often have the misconception, if I get a patent, then that saves me. Well, if you really think of what a patent does, it actually exposes to the world what you invented. And then it does give you the right, to be able to, manage and sue or whatever you need to do to protect what you invented. But you need to be able to protect that. Whereas if you see a lot of startups, they just went to, we will build faster, we'll innovate faster. We're not worried about IP. And I see that as also being a trend in the decentralized world with some of the DeFi projects and some of the decentralized things I see going on, is they just look to innovate faster. Creative Commons, innovate faster, move forward. So don't know if that thoroughly answers your question, Carlos. Part of that is my opinion of what I'm saying, but the facts are that, from a patent standpoint, these Chinese firms have, gotten a lot of those. And I was also looking at dApps recently, and what was interesting there was it wasn't firms. There were 2 Chinese universities, which in the AI and machine learning space is also true, that the universities in China have done a lot on, focusing on and putting efforts toward developing machine learning and AI. So I sort of see this as all things around data and things that can make data more transparent, more usable, and moving forward with the fact that data is underlying all these capabilities.
Did you manage to see what were these patents? Did you manage to, or is it only Chinese?
What was the question again, Carlos, about them?
Yeah, what is it that these companies like Alipay are registering as intellectual property? What are they developing over there?
So I remember seeing some, as you would expect, some supply chain.
Right.
I saw things around financial, which you would expect, especially with Tencent and Alipay. Alipay, and to give some frame of reference, is Tencent had like double what Alipay had, and then the next one after Alipay was Ant blockchain, which I didn't thoroughly research those, Carlos, what Ant blockchain is into, but they seem to be the one most precisely in this area. And the next one was Ping An, P-E-N or P-I-N-G-A-N. And then finally was Beijing hologram. So I haven't researched all those to see exactly what those patents are for. But, I find it interesting that, while there may be certain constraints or, actions against potential cryptocurrency, the technology itself is marching forward.
And this would pretty much fall in line with the idea that China is this land in where things are stuck in the traditional ways, sometimes only innovating when it's convenient for the governments, right? I mean, I think I was very interested when I found out about your research about the fact that there are so many patents coming from China in the blockchain scene. And I'm even more curious to see, do you think those would be playing out into the general blockchain scene eventually? Do you think they have a potential to become sort of like a world superpower like they have become with other things in this regard?
Yeah, and I can't say I understand the culture that deeply, but I do think there's always a danger and a misconception of looking at it as an outsider. Clearly there's innovation going on. Clearly there's well-educated, smart people that are thinking, what can we do with our education and our capabilities? So I think that the next level, if you look at the decentralized culture where it's very open source, it is going to be, I'll just say, interesting if you look back at historical approach that, and this is other governments beyond China, versus the potential where the community has more at stake with basically in a DAO situation to be able to govern, to be able to vote, to be able to make their own future. It's transitional, I think, from all governmental standpoints. So I don't know the culture inside well enough. I just see the observation that if I think that the US has the most, I am incorrect. The research points out that it's not the US that's doing the most in the space, nor is it other countries that have been early stage. Canada, for instance, has done a lot in this space as well. And I think part of it is a population, because there are, just as in AI and machine learning, there's areas in Canada that are very advanced in what they're doing. And that's true when you go around the globe with certain areas. India is another a country that has done a lot with AI and machine learning, especially of late. Not that they haven't for years, but you can see that there's a movement. And I think that one of the options that exists, Carlos, is just as in the finance market, the fear of missing out happens in this area, and companies start looking to say, okay, what do we need to do to not fall behind?